humanists of our time. The modern, unbelieving secularists and humanists of our time. Is the great danger to freedom and good government.
People who reject the very word of God, people who reject the very word of God, people who reject the very word of God.
Good evening. Welcome to Freethinking 101. I'm Barbara Stocker of the Rationalist Society of St. Louis, and tonight we invite you to examine your biases and prejudice, your mindset, your values, your religion. In short, to reach into the recesses of your mind and sweep out the cobwebs that you find there. Tonight, our guest is Walter Hoops, also of the Rationalist Society of St. Louis. Walter has written Our Rationalist Heritage, articles for the Encyclopedia of Unbelief, and many articles for American Rationalist. Tonight, Walter will share with us his knowledge of the French Revolution. Welcome to the show, Walter.
Thank you.
Walter, can you take us back to the 18th century and explain the thinking of the times and tell us what was going on in some of the leading thinkers of the day to set the stage for the French Revolution?
I think this is absolutely necessary to do that in order to understand what happened 200 years ago in France. The French Revolution was a major event in the history of mankind. It grew out of the tremendous misery and discontent that had built up over the centuries in France, in Europe, and especially in France. And we have to admire, to realize that this was one of the revolutions, rebellions, that really lasted and brought some definite changes in the whole structure of society. There had been quite a number of rebellions before, but they never lasted because they were not organized. They were spur of the moment affairs, and the powers that be, they could push down and beat down these people without too much trouble. But the French Revolution that started, in July 1789, lasted. It lasted for practically 20 years and changed the whole structure, the whole picture of society. And the reason why it was so successful, in my opinion, although many historians don't agree with it, was that the thinking of the people that were active in the revolution came from the thinking of the 18th century, which we call the Age of Enlightenment. There were people in Europe, but especially in France, that prepared the mental climate that made it possible for the revolution to last and to prevail and make these changes. In France, the Enlightenment era was especially were concentrated in three people. There was first Rousseau, there was Voltaire, and there was Diderot. All three of them, in their own way, contributed a tremendous amount of writing and speaking to make the French Revolution possible. And I believe that it is proper that in this group, in this enterprise of broadcasting, that we examine at some later time at length the works, the lives of these people that are so important for the development of the French Revolution. We wouldn't have the time tonight to tell you the details of their lives, but I think, I believe, we should work on this at some future sessions.
Okay, but you can tell us a little bit about the type of thinking they were promoting at the time.
Right. I mean, Jean-Jacques Rousseau was the man who is best known for the idea of the consent of the governed. He believed that no prince or king should rule without the consent of the people that you ruled, which meant that there had to be democracy in a country to make it a good and decent society. Voltaire was the most gifted of them all, a playwright, a poet, a writer, and a pamphleteer of the first order. His hatred went mainly towards the excesses of the Catholic Church in France, where still the power of the Inquisition prevailed, and where many, many injustices occurred that he fought against, to such an extent that he had to leave the country and lived for a while in England. And then when he came back, he found out how the English were running their country at that time. They had had their revolution in 1688. And in England, they had freedom of thought, freedom of the press to some extent, nothing too much, but enough of it, that he was just amazed that those people got away with it. When he came back, he wrote a famous book, Letters on the English, where he talked about his experiences, and of course promoted the idea that that's the way it should be done in France too. That book was confiscated and was burned by the hangman, as it was customary in those days. And he had to reside near the border of France towards Germany, so that in case somebody should come and try to arrest him, that he would be able to go over the border where they couldn't reach him, because he had a lot of friends in France that would have told him if something like this would go on. The third one is Denis Diderot, the man who created the first universal dictionary. It was a lifelong work. It was suppressed many times by the government. And the last 10 volumes of it were created in secret, so that the government could not confiscate them. It is considered one of the greatest literary works of that era, and has done a tremendous amount of work of clearing up a lot of questions, and he did it in a way that he got around censorship by using some cross-references that even the censors couldn't stop. He died in 1784, just 5 years before the outbreak of the revolution. But their spirit, the spirit of these three men and their many friends around them, they did prepare the intellectual ground for the French Revolution. And the people like Robespierre and Danton and others, they were students of theirs. They knew their work, they had read what they were saying, and whether they sometimes did not understand exactly what originally had been meant, they still did their share to push the revolutionary work ahead. Now, when you have a big celebration like that, as the French had last year, to celebrate the 200th anniversary of such a big event, they did a tremendous job. I'm sure you have seen many of the parades, many of the things that went on, that they had all over. They still were dancing in the streets all night, as they did when I was there in 1924. I was working in Frankfurt at that time, and I decided for some reason or other that that was a good opportunity to go to Paris. I was practically the first tourist that came after the First World War to Paris, and I was told that the best way for me to get along would be to say that I was from Alsace-Lorraine, which is a bilingual country. But I thought if somebody would find out that wasn't true, then I would be in a much worse position. So I did not go that route. I told them point blank that I loved the French people, and I always did, and I loved their language, one of the most beautiful languages in the world. I'm still reading French every day. So I got along fine. I made some very good friends that helped me in many, many ways to get things to see that an ordinary tourist would never see. I always thought that this experience of how they do their festivals is a typically French way of doing it. They turn on all the fountains in Paris, and there are loads of them, only on that day. All the theaters that are owned by the state are free. You have to stand in line for a long time, but you can go to the opera, and you can go to the Théâtre Français, and it's all free. And then the dancing goes on all night long, on the streets. After a while, they stop it, and they close the road, and the musicians that are on a wagon, they pull away, and then the traffic goes through for maybe 5-10 minutes. And then you put on a new dance again. And I had a time of my life.
Walter, for those of us who are a little bit rusty on our history, could you go back and explain the events of the revolution?
Right. Well, the revolution, as I said, came about the fact that the third estate, as they were called, the common people, the bourgeoisie as we call them today, was not represented in any way in running the government. It was only the two main people. There was the nobility and the clergy that run the country. And it was the bourgeoisie that supplied the money for the taxes. And they felt the time had come that they should also have responsibility in running the government. The pressure became so strong that finally the king relented and called an assembly. And when the assembly came together, they found that there were so many other people in other parts of the country outside of Paris that felt the same way, that they decided to take matters in their hand and decided that they were establishing themselves as the National Assembly, and they were putting on the laws that they wanted to put on the books. When the king resented, they decided to call in the National Guard, and if in order for the National Guard to have power and weapons, they went to the Bastille, because they thought in the Bastille they would find guns. They didn't, because the Bastille was by that time no fortress anymore real. It was a survival from an old war with the English, and it was a prison. There were some few people in there, but while they are doing it, so many people joined them, so that the men gave up in the Bastille, and the storm of the Bastille on the 14th of July became the day that today the government uses as the holiday to celebrate the revolution. Now there were a development of many kinds, because they found that even among the clergy and among the lower nobility, there were a number of people that felt the same as they did. And so gradually, through those negotiations, they started to set up a declaration of the citizens. I have it here, called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizens, which was similar to our Declaration of Independence and our Bill of Rights that we have here in America. And in this book, they set down what they wanted to be done about changing the whole outfit of the. Do you have it here? No? This book, this statement was printed in millions of copies and distributed all over Europe, and the reception that they had was tremendous, and everybody hoped that the French Revolution would also bring freedom and liberty to their own country.
What might be a few of the points in that Declaration of Rights there? Can you give us a couple of those?
Yeah. The law has the right to forbid only actions that are injurious to society. Whatever is not forbidden by law may not be prevented, and no one may be constrained to do what it does not prescribe. No man may be accused, arrested, or detained, except in the cases determined by law, and according to the forms prescribed thereby. Whoever solicit, expedite, or execute arbitrary orders, or have them executed, must be punished. But every citizen summoned or apprehended in pursuance of the law must obey immediately. He renders himself culpable by resistance.
Okay, so it's really setting up the laws that celebrate the rights of the people, and the law similar to what we have.
Right. Society has a right
society by law.
Society has a right to require of every public agent an accounting of his administration.
Well, that's a good one.
So, almost like if it was written today.
Yes, we need more of that today.
Now there are, of course, many people that have different ideas about how a government should be handled and how the French Revolution was handled. But hindsight comes easy. But these people that were putting these laws through, they found out that their leaders, the princes and the clergy, did not like it at all, the way they were doing things. And they were making efforts to get people from the outside, from Germany, from Italy, from Austria, in England first, to help them to beat these people down and put the old monarchy back in place. And in order to do this, the French people had to organize their own army, and they had a revolutionary army that was resisting these attempts. And people that were leading these armies, they were in many cases not trustworthy. And they went over to the enemy when the battle line was drawn. They went over to the enemy and left the soldiers who were not too well trained in the first place at the mercy of their enemies, which of course made the people in Paris and in France even more angry and more determined to prevail, and also to find out who was behind these people, who were doing this. And they found out that the nobility, particularly, that had fled France when they first started, that they were trying to get these fallen countries to declare war on France and throw over the revolution and got back the king as he was. Well, it didn't work, and the king decided to run away. He was caught on the way when he was flying fleeing to Germany, and so they had a process against him. Said our American Thomas Paine was at that time a member of the National Assembly, and he voted against the death penalty for the king because he felt sorry for the poor Slav, and that made him rather, some of the people suspicious about him because he was, of course, not a Frenchman. But they had made arrangements that a certain number of people could serve in the National Assembly even if they were not Frenchmen. The German poet Friedrich Schiller was one of them. He was also a member, honorary delegate to this National Assembly. He did not come, he did not go, but Thomas Paine decided to come and go, and he was a member of the National Assembly for a while, until he got under suspicion for his position about the king, and he was also arrested and would almost have been guillotined if it had not been for some mistake that was made when he was arrested. I cannot quite understand how that could have worked, but it did. He survived and came back to America, and as we all know, he died here. Now, the French Revolution, the laws that they were passed, they were so universal, like the equality of women, the equality of all races, that they became gradually, although not immediately, became the sample of all the laws in Europe. When Napoleon, who was a general for the revolutionary armies, became later on the emperor, made himself the emperor of France, he revised the whole codex, the whole laws thing. And the Code of Napoleon is today the basis of all the law that is administered in Europe. Now, if any one of you wants to read about the French Revolution, there is a lot of material available. As I say, not one historian really agrees always with the other one of how it happened and why it happened. And the latest one in the series of books that I have read on the revolution is this one called Citizens. It's not called a history, but it's called a chronicle of the French Revolution, and has a lot of wonderful information in it that I never knew before. It's by a man called Simon Schama. I don't know him, I never heard of him before, but it's a beautiful book. It's available at all the bookstores today and has been written up in all the major magazines, you know, of the country. Now, he is what the historians call a changer of the old way of looking at the revolution. So there are many statements in there that I do not agree with. What do they call them? What's the word? Revisionist? Revisionist, that's the word.
Okay, revisionist, yeah.
Right. And just like in any other profession, there are revisionists. that look at certain things from a different point of view. Hindsight is always easy. But on the other hand, those people that wrote the early books, they didn't have all the information available. Many things have come out that were not on hand at that time. Memoirs of people and documents that had been found in strange places. And these people have, of course, the advantage of using this to put another aspect on the events of the revolution. But there's no question about it in everybody's mind, including these revisionists, that it was one of the greatest events in human history, that's where modern history starts from the Declaration of the Rights of Man, of the establishment of a democratic system, of the participation of the people in the government of their country.
Walter, didn't you say before, too, that after the French Revolution, the French were the first people to grant the Jews full citizenship and lift restrictions against the Jews?
Oh, yes, yes. They found out, I mean, this comes out in this book here that I had never known before, but when those first people that got together, that the king had still called as an all-over parliament, and when these people started to write their impression and their laws, they found out that there were a number of Jews among them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, according to the laws in faith at that time, was that a Jew had no right whatsoever. He was just a tolerated man who they were willing to suffer, but he had no rights to vote. He didn't even have a second name. He was known by his first name, Abraham, Saul, and so on. And they decided that that couldn't go, that these people were the smartest people that gave them all these ideas. And these people were not even citizens. Nonsense. So decided one of the first things they did, after the first order of business was feudalism had to stop. No person could own any kind of land anymore that he did not need for his own purposes. And the second one was the equality of the Jews as citizens.
Well, we certainly owe a lot to the French Revolution. We'd like to thank you for being with us tonight. And if you want to hold up your book again, our viewers can get a copy of this by writing to us at the Rationalist Society of St. Louis, Post Office Box 2931, St. Louis, Missouri 63130, or calling us at area code 314-298-6649. If you have any comments or would like information on how to get a copy of Walter's book, please let us hear from you.